Hey everybody, Anthony Desiato here. I want to thank everyone who has been watching the video editions of Digging for Kryptonite or any of my other podcasts over this past year. I really do appreciate it. I am here to report that starting with this week's episode of Digging for Kryptonite, aka the finale to our 13-part Red Skies event, we are going to be reverting to audio only for this and any other shows within the Flat Squirrel podcast network, including another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. So please make sure that you subscribe to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, and any other show you're interested in via your audio podcast platform of choice. My shows are available wherever you get podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Please do keep your YouTube subscription active, though, because while I don't plan to continue putting out video versions alongside the audio versions of each podcast episode, I will continue to use my YouTube channel for special content. For example, I have a new Patreon reward tier called Kryptonian Science Council, where I hope to be joined by patrons on a monthly basis for a fun roundtable discussion. And I'll make those discussions available to everyone via my YouTube channel. So please do stay subscribed, but do also make sure that you go to your audio podcast platform of choice and subscribe to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. Particularly if you want to hear this week's episode on Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths, the conclusion to our Red Skies event. But I don't want to leave you guys empty-handed. I appreciate those of you who've been watching on YouTube. So as a special little bonus here today, in this video, I'm happy to present a special deleted scene from this week's Red Skies episode where my guest, Jermaine Axon from Acme Comics, and I talk about my ranking of the various DC Crisis level events. So this did not make it into the final audio form of the episode, but I am presenting this excerpt, this cut scene, exclusively in video form for you here on YouTube. So enjoy this deleted scene, this outtake from the final Red Skies episode. Head on over to your audio podcast platform of choice to listen to the entire episode, the full discussion of Dark Crisis, and stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you all. And of course, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. For decades, the history of the DC Universe has been marked by its crisis-level events, status quo-altering storylines that have rewritten continuity while also providing a meta-commentary on DC Comics publishing itself, and all under a signature red glow. This is Red Skies, a 13-part podcast epic mining these events and the Superman of it all. All right, here we go. Folks, don't come at me. This is my list. Make your own, share your own. People have done this on social media. I've seen it. You know, it's a whole thing. But anyway, this is I'm not going to keep saying for me. I'm going to say it right now. These are all mine, personal, but this is where I land. So I have 9, right? So I'm not including, even though we covered the pre-crisis team-ups and Identity Crisis and 52, that was important, very important connective tissue. But in terms of the core, what I'm deeming crisis level events, I have 9. And so I've broken them into 3 tiers, and I have ordered them within the tiers. Okay. Tier number 1. This will not come as a shock. Infinite Crisis. Number 2, Final Crisis. Number 3, Doomsday Clock. So Infinite Crisis holds a very special place to me for where I was at that point in life. And I also feel, you know, looking at it, trying to look at it as objectively as possible when I revisited it, it's like it was this, I think, a very effective sequel to the original Crisis, bringing back those characters, offering this commentary on what's become of the DC Universe, while also paying off all of those threads that had been building. And, you know, we can't separate this out from that buildup, but it was such a moment, such an event, and that's really cemented. And going back to it and enjoying it, actually even more than I had originally, you know, when I reread it for this, was truly a joy. So that's my number 1. Number 2, Final Crisis. I mean, if you had told me a few months ago that would be your number 2, I would have said, get out of here. But I just so came around on it. And I think that if I were to fully kind of divorce myself from my personal feelings towards Infinite Crisis, but Final Crisis might even move up. I think it might be kind of like the perfect Crisis. But yeah, I just think what it got at, and the fact that it really does stand more on its own, as much as it had, you know, tie-ins in name only mostly. It's something you could give someone that book, and again, they'd be working with it but I think everything you need is there, and I've really become such a fan of it. Number 3, Doomsday Clock. Again, I mean, I'm not a Watchmen guy, but it's such a beautiful Superman story, and I love what it has to say about Superman and what he means for the company and for this fictional universe. And I find it genuinely moving. And to say that for a quote unquote event comic, even though I agree with you, it's not a crisis like the other ones, but it earns its spot for me. So that's my top tier: Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Doomsday Clock.
Top shelf.
Tier 2. And this, again, especially I mean, this gets trickier. This gets trickier here, but I'm gonna go Flashpoint and Flashpoint Beyond. I'm gonna lump them together. You give me that. Flashpoint and Flashpoint Beyond, Original Crisis, 0 Hour. So Flashpoint and Flashpoint Beyond, I won't lie, Beyond kind of puts that package, makes that a more attractive package overall. I think that the Thomas Wayne story across those books, and like you said, I know the story continues in Tom King's Batman run and other places, but I really enjoy. I mean, I think they're enjoyable, intriguing reads. Not much Superman to be had, so that that as a Superman fan, I don't get as much mileage out of it. But while I don't think that any of the adaptations have really tapped into the full potential of this story, I think there's a reason why we continue to see this attempted in animation, on the small screen, on the big screen. I do think there's something there, and I think they're very, very readable, very enjoyable stories. So that's going to be my number 4. Number 5, The Original Crisis. So kind of like smack in the middle here. And again, I know for a lot of folks that's too far down the line, but it really just goes back to, again, respecting it and appreciating it more than I really enjoyed the reading of it. But it's a seminal story. It's still a dividing line when we talk about pre-crisis and post-crisis. It's still spawning sequels. It's still generating discussion. And again, it obviously it speaks for itself. So that's my number 5. And then number 6, 0 Hour. Here's the thing with 0 Hour. With the exception of the final issue, when Hal enters the scene, there's not, for me at least, there's not a ton of meat on the bone there. What I think we all like and remember about 0 Hour are the tie-ins, because I think there were some compelling tie-ins, and the 0 month that followed in all the titles. So I think the event overall and kind of what it generated, I think there was some really cool stuff there, and the nostalgia factor is huge. I mean, that's a moment in time I remember. It's not as definitive for me as Infinite Crisis, but I was there for it. But really looking at that core story in and of itself, it's again, I didn't get a ton out of it rereading it, but
I totally get that placement. I totally understand it. No real notes at all. I think that unlike what happened with Death Metal and Dark Crisis, I think that to do Death of Superman / Emerald Twilight, and then you do 0 Hour and Parallax is the Problem, there was a good, you're right in the zone, in the pocket, where you're like, oh, wow, Hal Jordan is doing this now? He's that degree of, doing that thing? That was kind of a exciting thing. I know you talked about, should Hal Jordan have been kind of at the front-loaded at the front of the story instead of this extant guy you never heard of and didn't care about? I thought it was pretty, at that time, there was a wow factor to that.
That's fair. No, I mean, that's the thing. I can get that. I can totally get that. I think, yeah, reading it in a collected edition with Hal on the cover, it's a different effect, but your point is very well taken. All right. The bottom tier, I hate to say it like that, but all right, 7, 8,
Here we go.
All right. Believe it or not, number 7, Death Metal. And I know based on when we're recording that you haven't heard the Death Metal episode yet, but I had an easier time with it than Metal. It still did plenty of world building, but it eased up at a certain point. And I think its overall message about connectedness and about honoring everything that's come before, I think it was a good message. And overall, I enjoyed it certainly more than metal. So that's my number. That's my number 7. The last two, I've really kind of kicked these back and forth. I'm gonna go. Oh man, I say this as if it really matters. We'll all get on with our lives regardless of where I put these. But I'm gonna, I think, maybe be a little generous, and I'm gonna give Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths the number
I
8
knew it.
spot.
I knew it because of the fan service. It bumped it up off the bottom floor. It did.
It's there's a little bit of the fan service, but so obviously by default we have Metal as my ninth and final pick here. I can't I can't discount just the readability aspect. Like I really struggled with getting through Metal, with just getting through all of that. It was exhausting. And Dark Crisis, despite all of the issues I've had with it, it's very readable, very digestible. Maybe too much so, too light, but people are listening to this. It's like, what does this guy want? Metal's too much, and Dark Crisis is not enough.
So that does surprise me that you have placed death metal over metal, because I feel like metal is kind of like Attack of the Elseworlds. And I feel like Elseworlds would have had some, even if it's towards the tail end, Elseworlds and that little logo, and like, oh, it's, Batman, only he's like the monster of Frankenstein. There's a little bit of that I thought would have had more appeal to you, as far as like, the Bruce Wayne that got a Green Lantern ring right in Crime Alley as the Waynes were shot down, became this awful Green Lantern. He wants to come to our DC universe and make things a little bit worse for everybody. I feel like that would have been more appealing to you than in death metal, like, hey, where'd Sergeant Rock go? He was here a second ago.
True, but Death Metal has Superboy Prime and Superman with long hair. So
Okay. Understood. Asked and answered.